The New Orleans Saints will draft a quarterback in the first round of this year's NFL draft, but it won't be at number 9 overall. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going through my predictions for the NFL draft this year for the New Orleans Saints. We'll dive into how the New Orleans Saints will land 4 starters in this year's NFL draft. We'll take a look at, even though they're not going to go quarterback at number 9, where they will go at number 9. And even though they won't go quarterback at number 9, they still have a chance to go quarterback in the first round. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The New Orleans Saints will draft a quarterback in the first round of this year's NFL draft, but it will not be at number 9 overall. If you caught yesterday's episode, our Mock Draft Monday, you know exactly where I'm going with this. But we're doing our predictions today. So I'm doing a bunch of different predictions that I think the Saints will do during the draft. Some of them bold, some of them sourced, some of them not sourced, some of them not bold. We'll kind of go through all of it here. But I won't always tell you which one's which, but I want to know your predictions as well, so make sure you send me yours too. So here's my first prediction, that the Saints will draft a quarterback in the first round. It just simply won't be at number 9 overall. And I think that one of those quarterbacks will be either Louisville quarterback Tyler Shough or Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart. These are the names we continue to hear more and more and more, loudly as we get closer and closer and closer to the draft. And this kind of backs up one of those theories that I had earlier on in the offseason, where I said, the noise is too loud too early on all of these guys. I want to wait and see what happens with the guys where things have been most quiet. Quinn Ewers, Tyler Shough, Jalen Milroe. Then all of a sudden we saw, the private workout with Jalen Milroe. We've seen a bunch of stuff. They even I think they did a top 30 visit with Quinn Ewers, if I remember correctly. Certainly had dinner with him in Austin before his pro day and all that. And then now we're starting to see Tyler Shough. And so I think that's the direction that New Orleans is going to go. I think that they're going to trade up into the first round and they're going to select a quarterback. We did the same thing in the Locked On NFL mock draft. That was not by accident. That was a thing that felt like it very much could be predictive, and turns out could be very predictive. The question is, where will the Saints trade up? Will they trade up just to 32 like I did with the Philadelphia Eagles? In my mock draft, it was with the Los Angeles Rams because they had already traded back, but in real life, number 32 still held by the Eagles, which could cost them a future second and in a late pick swap. Could cost them this year's 3rd round pick if they don't want to give up any future 2nd round picks or they don't want to give up any future selections. There's a couple different ways that they can go. So they could get up to 32, but they could also move up to 24. Minnesota Vikings barely have any draft capital within the top 100. You look at the Denver Broncos at number 20. They're kind of begging teams to kind of move up ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And moving up ahead of the Pittsburgh Steelers is helpful because it allows you to be able to make sure you get the quarterback that you want. Now, in my opinion, the Saints have another way to do this, which is to trade back from 9. Let's say, there's a player that's up on the board that, the Denver Broncos are apparently looking for potential trades, right? Okay, if they see somebody on the board at 9 that they really like and they're willing to give up a bunch of draft capital to the Saints to be able to move up to 9, and the Saints move back to 20, that puts the Saints in prime position to land whatever quarterback they want in the middle of the first round. And I don't think that quarterback is Shedeur Sanders, but I do think that quarterback is either Tyler Shough or Jackson Dart. I think there's some Jalen Milroe interest in there, but that could just be me kind of perceiving that because I think Jalen Milroe is so interesting. The bottom line here is that this is not what I would do if I were the New Orleans Saints. I would stick and pick at 40 and take whichever quarterback is there that makes the most sense to me, because I'm perfectly okay with taking Jalen Milroe at 40. I'm perfectly okay if Tyler Shough is there at 40. I'm perfectly okay with taking Kyle McCord in the 3rd or 4th round. But that's me. The New Orleans Saints clearly have guys that they like. And if they want to go and get the guys that they like, then that's exactly what they're going to go and do. So that's what I think the New Orleans Saints will do in this situation. Now, what creates a really interesting kind of mold around that is, what does that mean moving forward for a guy like Derek Carr? And so now I want to go to my next prediction, which is that news on Derek Carr's future will come very soon after the draft if the New Orleans Saints do indeed select a quarterback. I think that selecting that quarterback is going to be kind of the death knell for whatever conversation there is to be had with Derek Carr, if Derek Carr truly wants out of New Orleans, which certainly sounds like is the case, right? There's a lot of stuff that's hinting towards that. There's a lot of things that are loudly suggesting that as well. And so with all of that, I think that it's very, very easy to say that the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr will know their fate moving forward quickly after the draft, should they end up drafting a quarterback in this year's NFL draft. If they don't take a quarterback, which I still think is possible, right? You try to trade up, you can't trade up. The guys you want go off the board. Well, then you move on. If they don't draft a quarterback, then maybe things in terms of the murky waters there just kind of rests for a little while, and then eventually a decision is made. But I do think that if the New Orleans Saints select a quarterback in this year's draft, that there will be some other report that comes out soon after that effectively says, this is what's happening with Derek Carr. Derek Carr is asking for a trade. He's, moving forward, whatever it might be, all those other things. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I do think that we get clarity around the Derek Carr situation more quickly if the New Orleans Saints do indeed take a quarterback in this year's NFL draft class. I do think that maybe that clarity comes from Mickey Loomis or Kellen Moore via press conference after draft days. I don't hold my breath on that, though. The New Orleans Saints have been very, very quiet around this Derek Carr situation, while the Derek Carr camp seems to be very loud around this situation. I think that's a smart move by New Orleans in this whole fiasco. But I am curious to see if once they have a quarterback that they really like, whoever that quarterback might be, if maybe the tone changes a little bit. We'll certainly see. I don't expect that, but it could be very interesting. Going back to the shuck and dart of it all, look, I think the Saints are going to take who they like. And it's not really about consensus boards. It's not really about what the public thinks. It's not really about what mock drafts say. It's not really about average draft pick on mock drafts, which is just the public doing mock drafts and then you getting a number of average draft pick out of it. It's not an actual ranking, all these other things. I think the Saints are going to take the quarterback that they feel like they can win with. And if they take the right quarterback, then great. If they take the wrong quarterback, then they just go back to the quarterback well again in 2026, 2027, wherever it might be. And so I think that the Saints are going to make a decision that's entirely based on the quarterback that they like, not what every reporter says, not what all of the analysts say, not who the evaluators say is the best quarterback or isn't the best quarterback or whatever it might be. I think the Saints are kind of hoping maybe if they do take a quarterback in the late first round here, that they get kind of the Justin Herbert effect out of it, right? People were super down on Justin Herbert going into the draft, people saying that he shouldn't be drafted in the first round. They take a guy that has some of those tools. That's one of the reasons why I think Shough's up there. And then they try to get a starting quarterback out of that. And there's a chance that it happens. There's a chance that it doesn't. We'll see where things go. But I do think the New Orleans Saints will be moving up to go and get a quarterback in this year's draft. And they will do so in the first round. So if they're not taking a quarterback at number 9, what will they do at number 9? Well, I think 3 main areas of their roster are very, very possible. And 2 specific names could change everything. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the absolute best place to get your tickets, especially on last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% by buying last-minute tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more over at Game Time today. I use Game Time all the time. It's the only way that I buy all of my tickets because I love just kind of making that decision last minute and being able to get away with an absolute steal in the process. I also love using Game Time when I'm traveling. You can sort by city. You can get rid of all of the there's a bunch of stuff like all-in pricing that you can toggle on so that there's no surprise fees at checkout. Like everything's just super transparent and super easy to use. So take all the guesswork out of buying tickets today by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, Lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints might not draft a quarterback at number 9, but I have a pretty good idea of where they are going to go at number 9. It comes down to 3 positions and 2 names that could change everything. I shouldn't say 3 positions. I should say 3 areas of the roster and then 2 names specifically that could change everything. So we think that the New Orleans Saints are going to trade up for a quarterback in the back half of the first round, maybe even just move up in the second round, if depending upon how the board falls. That's going to be the attempt. We'll see if they're successful in doing so, whether that be at 20, 24, 32. We'll see where things go. But at number 9, I think the New Orleans Saints are going to stick and pick there. No reason to move up. I doubt that they're going to move back, although it would be wise in this year's draft, I think, in my opinion. But at number 9, I think the New Orleans Saints are either going to go to the trenches, Tyler Warren, or Ashton Jeanty. Those are the 3 areas: trenches, tight end, running back. And the 2 names that could change everything are Tyler Warren and Ashton Jeanty. The way that I see it is, if Ashton Jeanty or Tyler Warren are on the board at 9, that they're likely the selection for the New Orleans Saints. This is my prediction. However, if both of those names are off the board, then the Saints are going to address their trenches. Now, I am curious. If there's a world in which somehow or another Tyler Warren and Mason Graham both end up on the board at 9, maybe that's an exception. To where instead of going like, oh, Tyler Warren's on the board, we're taking Tyler Warren, that's a defensive lineman that is talented enough that you probably go, actually, I want the defensive lineman. Same thing for Ashton Jeanty and Mason Graham. However, here's the conversation that we've continued to have on this show, and it's one of the reasons why I believe that this is where the New Orleans Saints will go, is because there were only about 4 or 5 blue bloods in this year's class. Those superstar level players are Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State, Travis Hunter, the wide receiver / corner coming out of Colorado, and then it's running back Ashton Jeanty from Boise State and tight end Tyler Warren out of Penn State. And then maybe in there for some folks is Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, and Jalon Walker, the Georgia defender. I'll just call him defender, but he's really kind of like an outside linebacker, right? Can drop back in coverage, can support in the run game, and can rush the passer. So for me, the thing that I look at for this draft and for the number 9 overall selection is which of the 2, Tyler Warren or Ashton Jeanty, are available. And if they are not available, who are the offensive and defensive linemen on the board? And this isn't a surprise, right? Like, the surprise comes down to the Saints being very heavily invested in either a running back or a tight end with a top 10 selection. And in most drafts, I would completely disagree with that being the angle. But in this draft, when Tyler Warren is Tyler Warren and Ashton Jeanty is Ashton Jeanty, I get it. I understand. And now this goes against some of the things that the Saints have done. I mean, the Saints have not taken a first-round tight end since they took Irv Smith back in the day in the first round. And he was the second of 2 selections in the first round. It was Willie Roaf and Irv Smith in that same draft. That's the only tight end they've ever selected in the first round. And then for a while, the highest drafted tight end that they had selected was Jimmy Graham, who was in the 3rd round. So taking a tight end in the first round feels like it's something that's very outside of the ordinary for the New Orleans Saints. But if you pay attention to what it is that Kellen Moore said during the annual meetings this year, he talked about how he doesn't really look at it as tight end, running back, wide receiver, slot, out wide, whatever it might be. He's looking at the skill position. And if there's a skill position player that can have an impact on their game, then that's a player that they want to work with. Tyler Warren has the ability to do that. Now, tight end typically takes a little bit of time in order to completely translate to the next level of the NFL, but we've seen over the course of the recent past that the kind of learning curve hasn't been so steep that players at the position haven't been able to have an impact in the first round. And one of them is that, and one of those players that should be the example of that will be, I believe, Tyler Warren. So my prediction is that the Saints will draft either Tyler Warren or Ashton Jeanty, or go offensive or defensive line. Why Ashton Jeanty? Because Kellen Moore. That's a pretty easy question for me. That's a pretty easy one to answer. You look at the pairing that he had in Dallas between Tony Pollard as well as Ezekiel Elliott. You had this bulldozing running back that had a little bit of versatility, partnered with this very versatile change of pace back in Tony Pollard. You look at the exciting running back duo that he had with the Philadelphia Eagles, with which he just won a Super Bowl. You have the bruising running back of Saquon Barkley, who's the workhorse, but also has a little bit of versatility. You can use him as a receiver. You can run routes. He can catch passes, all those other things. And then they also had Kenneth Gainwell. Now you go to the New Orleans Saints and they have Alvin Kamara. And that's kind of it. Now, you would hope that Kendre Miller takes a big step forward, but you can't fully rely on that when you have a potential perennial Pro Bowler sitting there at number 9 if Ashton Jeanty is available coming out of Boise State. And the transition time for a running back in the NFL far, far tighter than the transition time, or shorter than the transition time for a tight end in the NFL. And so I could absolutely see this look with Ashton Jeanty being Ashton Jeanty as kind of the workhorse, big-bodied, can run through you bulldozer type of receiver or running back who has some receiving capabilities. If you go back to his 2023 tape, we all focus on just the 2024 tape, but you go back to 2023, he's catching screens and outlet passes and housing them from 60 yards out. He has the ability to do that. And then you're able to finally re-maximize Alvin Kamara as the change of pace, working in space kind of running back. And I think that that is something that would give Kellen Moore a bit of the offensive structure that he wants when it comes to his roster. And also, if the Saints are indeed moving ahead without Derek Carr, because Derek Carr doesn't want to be in New Orleans, and they are turning to a young running back, then having a big-bodied tight end target in the middle of the field or close to the line of scrimmage that has some yards after catch ability is that young quarterback's best friend. Having a run game that's expansive, that's versatile, and that's multiple, and that can support your young running back by taking the pressure off of him, bang, that's very helpful too. And also you can open up the play action game, the RPO game, all those other things, which those quarterbacks, Tyler Shough and Jackson Dart, who we believe are kind of in focus for the New Orleans Saints, those guys can run those offenses. So when I look at where the Saints are in their life cycle, which is still early now because of the new head coach and the new swing and all these other things, I can absolutely see these positions being positions that are still difference makers for New Orleans. Now, if either one of those players are off the board and they go back to the trenches, which they have done over and over again throughout their franchise's history, several players come to mind. LSU's Will Campbell, who can play tackle but also could move inside, or maybe you move Trevor Penning inside. I don't think you moved Taliese Fuanga inside. He just gave you a spectacular year at right tackle. I don't think you get in the way of that. Armand Membu, the offensive lineman out of Missouri, who could plug in at right tackle for you if you wanted to. You have other guys out there like Josh Simmons, whose medicals came back clean and maybe could potentially rise up the board. The New Orleans Saints love Ohio State players. Player with an injury history, feels very Saints coded, something that the New Orleans Saints could potentially do if they feel really good about his medicals. Jumping over to the defensive side, obviously Michigan's Mason Graham, the defensive tackle, makes a ton of sense. James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher out of Tennessee, makes a ton of sense. Mike Green out of Marshall makes a ton of sense. Like, there's a lot of places that the Saints could go on the defensive line. There are, of course, some more project guys. Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M, Mykel Williams, a little bit less so in my opinion, coming out of Georgia. I think Mykel Williams is kind of just he's very similar to me to James Pierce Jr., but doesn't have the production, which I think is something worth highlighting. But Shamar Stewart, I think, needs to go somewhere that has the opportunity to develop him. I don't think that the Saints are in that position. And I think the Saints know that they're not in that position when they didn't retain Peyton Turner. They didn't put effort into a guy that they already spent the first round pick on, that they would have liked to have seen develop. This coaching staff didn't develop him. This coaching staff said, no, we're good. I don't know I think that gives you a pretty good indication that they know they're not in position to do that. So we'll see which way things go. Mykel Williams out of Georgia, a little bit tough because dealing with the ankle injury, workouts apparently weren't so great, all that. And so we'll see where things go for him. But expect the New Orleans Saints to either go to the trenches, but the two players that could change that, Penn State's Tyler Warren, the tight end, as well as Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints will draft 4 starters in this year's draft. And let me tell you what positions I think they will come from. We got that coming up for you next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know that you, with the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K, can turn your television into a gaming and entertainment hub because your Amazon Fire TV Stick is also an Xbox? How cool is that? You can get into gaming with your Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K, just like you can get into all those bingeable series that you love to watch. All you need is a compatible controller, and then you can fire up the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included. That's going to give you access to a bunch of popular titles like EA Sports College Football 2025, as well as Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed and much more. And it's great for mobile gaming as well because no console is required. Just take that controller, your Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K on the road with you, and you are all set. Head over to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controllers are required. Available on select devices, including Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Amazon Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I got two more predictions for you when it comes to the New Orleans Saints NFL draft class here in 2025. And both center around the class as a whole. Let me start off with this one. I think that the New Orleans Saints will draft 4 future starters in this year's draft class. It'd be great if they got 5, but I think they get 4 at the very least. And those starters are going to get opportunities to start games during their rookie contract. It might not be right away here in 2025, but we'll see which way things go. The 4 positions where I think they land bona fide future starters, are quarterback, offensive line, tight end, and cornerback over on the defensive side. Let me start with quarterback. If the New Orleans Saints select a quarterback in this year's 2025 first round, that quarterback will eventually be this team's starter. Period. Full stop. The New Orleans Saints have not drafted a quarterback in the first round since Archie Manning. And so to draft a quarterback in the first round, especially one that you potentially trade up for, which is what we think they're going to do, and to not start them would just be an absolute waste of a pick. Absolute waste of assets in terms of moving up and all those other things. If you're trading up and drafting a quarterback in this year's NFL draft, hello, welcome to New Orleans, you're a starter. And maybe you're not a starter right away, the week 1 of 2025. Maybe they want to give you some development time and they roll with Spencer Rattler to start the season, or Derek Carr is magically okay and then they roll with Derek Carr to start the season. I don't know. But at some point during this rookie season, that quarterback, if drafted in the first round, will become the starter in 2025. Now, if I had my druthers and I waited around until pick 40 for the New Orleans Saints to make their selection for them and took the best quarterback available at 40, I could then make the argument to sit that quarterback their entire rookie year, redshirt them, and give them an opportunity in 2026, depending upon how Spencer Rattler does. If Spencer Rattler does extremely well, then great. You have a highly drafted young quarterback either sitting behind him, or you have a highly drafted quarterback that you could potentially trade, or you've raised Spencer Rattler's trade values. You could go that route too, but I don't think that that's the route that you would typically go. If you've got the guy that you know is going to be the starter, then you've got the guy you know is going to be the starter. And so that's the way that I would handle it. But if the Saints are trading up and they're going for a quarterback in the round 1, bang, that's your starting quarterback. Number 2, in terms of those 4 potential starters, I think comes on the offensive line. That could be somebody that's drafted early. That could be somebody that's drafted in the 3rd round. That could be somebody that's drafted in the 4th round. I am so confident in this year's offensive line draft class that I think the New Orleans Saints will get an eventual starter out of that position by investing in that position. So I absolutely see that being the way to go. If they take one at 9, then it's no questions asked that player is a starter from the very beginning, week 1. If they take a player in the 3rd or 4th round, maybe they're not. Maybe they go Dylan Radins to start, but then you eventually plug somebody in on the interior, or you go into training camp, you let them battle it out. And even that 3rd or 4th round pick could potentially win that starting left guard role. I think that that's the way the New Orleans Saints end up getting their 2nd starter in this class. Number 3 comes at tight end. If you draft one at number 9 overall, which is where I think the Saints are going to end up going, then yeah, you've got your starter at tight end. The wild card here would be if Tyler Warren goes number 7 to the New York Jets and therefore doesn't make it to the New Orleans Saints at number 9, then I would swap out tight end with running back. But here's the thing. Let's say the New Orleans Saints do take Tyler Warren at number 9. They could still draft a starting running back later in this draft. Let's say the New Orleans Saints do take Ashton Jeanty at number 9 because Tyler Warren is off the board. You could still draft a starting quality tight end, a Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon, a Gunnar Helm out of Texas, a Mason Taylor out of LSU. You could still land one of those guys in the later rounds. And so running back / tight end is kind of my wild card to be the 4th, maybe even 5th. But right now we're calling tight end the 3rd. And then finally, we'll go with cornerback. I think you draft any cornerback in the first 3 rounds, you've got a potential starter. And that could be a week 1, 2025 starter. I think the idea that Isaac Yiadom comes in and ends up starting for you is a comfortable one for New Orleans. But I don't think that this team, who has consistently invested in in cornerbacks, in their secondary, even when they had starters in their secondary ready to go. You think Janoris Jenkins back in the day, they've always still gone and pulled the trigger there. Alontae Taylor was drafted when there were still starters in the building. Paul Sidibe was drafted when there were still starters in the building. There was a pretty good idea of what that could look like. And so I look at those players or that position as a place where the Saints are always looking to add more talent. And maybe that was a Dennis Allen thing, but honestly, I think that's a Jeff Ireland thing. This New Orleans Saints team has been very, very good at scouting cornerback talent. I don't think that changes with Dennis Allen out of the building. So I would put corner up there. The wild card again is running back for me. Or if it's running back, then the wild card for me is tight end, right? And that could be the 5th potential starter for you. So I think they get 4 future starters in this year's draft. They might not all be week 1, 2025 starters, but I do think that they get starters in the long term out of this draft, 4, maybe even 5. And that brings me to my final prediction. The post-draft grades for the New Orleans Saints draft class will be low, but the draft class's impact is going to tell an even more important story down the road. I think you're going to see a lot of C's and a lot of D's when it comes to this New Orleans Saints draft class, when it comes to the experts and the analysts out there. You know me, I don't do draft grades. I think they're stupid, but a lot of people do draft grades. And so when those draft grades come out, they probably will be low for New Orleans for one of two reasons. Either they take a quarterback, but they don't take the quarterback that evaluator liked, or they don't take a quarterback at all, and then every evaluator dunks on them for not taking a quarterback. And I don't think that either one of those things necessarily make this a bad draft class. I don't think, personally, that a draft class is going to be completely dictated by the quarterback that is or is not taken as a part of that draft class. I think that's ridiculous. But I do think that's what you're going to see a lot of. That you're going to see a lot of people who are criticizing this New Orleans Saints draft class from the analyst perspective and that are giving them low grades and all these other things. But I think that when you look at this draft class back down the road 2 years from now, a year later, 3 years from now, that it might tell a different story. That part I can't predict. I can't predict that far into the future. We got to see about injuries. We got to see about coaching. We got to see about general management. We have to see about all of the other stuff around the New Orleans Saints that would impact how successful a draft class can be. It wouldn't be as simple as, oh, they took those players will do well. There's so many other factors. But what I do say is that I will not be critical of this draft class unless the Saints do something absolutely wild until we actually see what these players are and what they turn into. Because I do think that with as strong as this draft class is in the middle, because of its ability to provide starter talent and long-term starter talent, that the Saints are going to walk away with more starters than not in this year's draft class, or just as many starters as not in this year's draft class. And so I think that will end up looking like a better draft class a year, 2, 3 years from now. But I promise you, after this draft class, either the New Orleans Saints will have taken the wrong quarterback, or they'll have taken the quarterback that everybody thinks they shouldn't have taken, or they will not have taken a quarterback at all, and everybody would have thought that they should have taken a quarterback. That's how I think a lot of analysts nationally are going to look at it. And so I think that the New Orleans Saints are going to get dunked on a lot nationally when it comes to their draft class, but I don't think that's going to be completely depictive of what the reality of this draft class has the potential to be for New Orleans and really any other team. I think this is going to be a very, very good draft class across the board. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, I have a good friend coming on the show, and we're going to tell you what we think the New Orleans Saints will do at number 9, what Derek Carr's future looks like, and what a starting quarterback in 2025 actually means for Kellen Moore's future. We got that coming up for you next. We continue on with another episode of Locked on Saints tomorrow. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Learn how the family's doing them and how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.